Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Ricky Levon, teacher and facilitator of the men's Bible study at the Worthington Church. And this is the second half to the, I almost said the wrong thing, to the Good Samaritan Bible study. So hopefully, you've already looked at questions 1 through 8, and this was going to cover questions 9 through 15. So in question 9, it states Jesus explained the answer by telling a famous parable on how to treat our neighbor and who they are. What happens at the beginning of the story? Now that's found in Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 32. I'm going to read this for you. Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 32 says, Jesus took up the question and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the road when he saw him. He passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Basically, the initial part of that answer is that the priest and the Levite both saw this person who had just went through a terrible situation. He was on his way from one place to another, and the road is kind of windy, and it's dangerous. But the man initially gets beat up, tossed to the side. He's hurt, he's wounded, he's been robbed. A priest sees the person, looks over, and is like, I don't want no parts of that. The Levite looks over, like same thing. I don't want any parts of that either. And now some parts of it could have been that they could have looked over and they could have thought, well, if I go over there, what if the same people come after me? Or maybe they were just busy thinking, well, I need to do something else. I got somewhere I need to be. There's all kind of things that could have happened. So that's the initial part. Jesus basically starts off the parable stating there was some high-ranking leadership in the church who looks over, sees someone who's in trouble, and decided not to help. Now, of course, when Jesus did this particular parable, he probably wasn't just coming out of nowhere. There was probably actually a story that was going on during that time that many of the people would have been familiar with. So that's question 9. Question 10 even talks about that the priests and Levi were key figures in the church at the time. What was Jesus saying about their behavior towards those in need, and how can this apply to our current time? It's more of a personal question, but one thing, of course, we can definitely think about from that is that the Lord's basically saying, listen, there are people, and Jesus was talking to the man who was a lawyer who was in church, and he's like, there are people who are in church who might speak the good speak and say great things, know the word of God, does awesome service and a bunch of other stuff. But when someone's in need, they're not there to be able to help. So that's the initial part of this particular talk of his particular parable. And the reason why I think the Lord also called out these particular two individuals is that he didn't call out someone who could not have helped the person. It's not like the Lord didn't call out someone who they themselves wouldn't have been able to do anything for this person. Instead, it was these are two people who, whether it's through means, through the ability, through strength, somehow or the other, they actually have the ability to help, but they chose not to. So, question 11 says, who helped the stranger, and what did he do? Verse 33 states, let me just find it, but a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion. Something key to remember. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. So what did the last man do, the Samaritan? Well, he took care of his wounds right there at the time. I'm sure that had to take up some time. That was dangerous because he also could have been putting himself in danger to whoever did the robbery, to the guy. That could have also happened to him. Not only that, but then he also put the man on his animal, which means he had to walk. He was letting the man take over his ride. And then he also took him to the inn, and he provided funds, money, I'm sure food, shelter, whatever was needed. And I don't know if this is something that he did regularly, but somehow that he knew the innkeeper, and he was like, listen, I have to still do what it is that I still have to go. But when I come back, and I'm good for it, I will make sure to then, of course, pay whatever extra is needed. And I love that because it shows you that just because you might be on your way of doing something, and in this case for the church, And we can kind of go into question 12. But in this case, it could be for the church, it could be for your work, job, who knows, whatever it might be. Just because you're doing something doesn't mean that if you're able to help someone else on the way, doesn't mean that we don't help that person out just because, well, I got something more important to do. No, sometimes the Lord puts those people in our path because it's like there's someone else who is in need. Will you stop? Take the time to be able to help them. Question 12 talks about the last person in the story was someone on the outside of the church. It does say how Samaritans did have a belief, but it was different. But they were treated like outsiders to the Israelites. And it says, what does it say about the behavior towards those in need, and also how can this apply to now? The one thing that we can learn now is that just because someone may not be in the church or share the same denomination or be in the same even belief system as us, doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people out there who's doing great work to help those in need. And this is something that we have to also be able to understand and have a knowledge of and take care of and take note to be able to say, listen, I can learn from someone else. Just because they may not be in the church, if they're still providing a service, whether it's through Meals on Wheels, doing marches, and I mean marches for like cancer research or anything of that nature, or doing things for diabetes, or trying to help out people who might have been abused, or doing so many other things, whatever it might be. It's like, hey, listen, I can learn from them. The Samaritan gave up time, effort, finances, so much just to be able to help out a stranger. Question 13 says, what question does Jesus propose after the story, and what is the response of the lawyer? I really do want to read this one because this is the lawyer speaking now after hearing Jesus' parable. He says, which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? So this is the Lord. Gives the parable, tells him. So what do you think is going on? And the man says, the one who showed mercy to him. He said, then Jesus told him, go and do the same. You want to know who your neighbor is? It's the person who, when they're in need, you show mercy. Even earlier it talks about how the Samaritan had compassion. That is a trait that we really do have to learn and be able to ask God for on a daily basis. Saying, Lord, how can I possibly have compassion? How can I possibly show mercy? Whether it's to a friend, family member, co-worker, student, or even strangers. And when the Lord provides that opportunity to just go ahead and take it. Question 14 says, Jesus gives a call to be like the Samaritan, obviously. How can we fulfill that on a personal level and a corporate level? And I mean by corporate, I mean by a church level. On a church level, oftentimes it's the programs or the services that we might provide to the community. There's so many different things that the churches can do. Learn whatever your community is in need of, and then try to be the means to help educate in that, to help provide that service, or to do something of that nature. But on a personal level, that's just it. It's very personal. It could be the Lord is calling you to help out people when it comes to children, or maybe you've overcome a terrible situation in your life, and that's where the Lord wants you to be able to help out. Or it could be in the health industry. It could be in some other means or fashion. There's so much that what you have to learn is, what is it, Lord? What do you want me to do? Where can I be a good Samaritan to someone